Okay. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونستهديه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. إنه من يهديه الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. أما بعد. Okay, mandatory recap, inshallah. It's been a while, so last time we spoke about, we'll continue some of the stories about the conquest of Mecca, what some of the people did, the non-Muslims, some of the conversations they had, and the Prophet knew about it. That was a scene from the movie showing Bilal climbing the Kaaba in order to say the adhan for the second time. Conquest of Mecca. So I won't go too much into the conquest of Mecca, and we've covered that. But Prophet ﷺ appointed a governor because he knew he wasn't going to stay in Mecca for long. Someone from the tribe of Bani Umayyah, the same tribe as Abu Sufyan. So that was Attad ibn Asid. And this was a concession because to Abu Sufyan could not continue ruling Mecca, but the Prophet appointed someone from his tribe, Bani Umayyah, to continue ruling over Mecca. Now, we covered in some detail the tribe of Hawazin uniting. So Hawazin was a number of tribes. Banu Nasr, Banu Sa'ad, and Banu Thaqif. Banu Sa'ad is actually sort of not that well known, but there was one famous lady from Bani Sa'ad. That was Halima al-Sa'diyya, the same lady who breastfed the Prophet when he was a child. So from Bani Sa'ad. Now from the tribe of Bani Nasr, a man named Malik ibn Auf came along and he united. There was several tribes under Hawazin. Thaqif was the tribe that inhabited the city of Ta'if. So he was able to unite them after the conquest of Mecca. He united them on the basis of the Prophet belonging to and opposing another tribe, not from the tribe, one of the tribes of Hawazin. So they said, we have to unite, we have to fight them. Wasn't any proper justification, no religious, not really on religious grounds, it was just tribalism. But somehow he managed to unite them for the first time in their history, and they formed an army of 25,000. And they were intending to march onto Mecca. Of course, the Prophet heard about this and in Mecca, and he still had this army of 10,000, which we conquered Mecca with, and he joined an extra 2,000 new converts to the army of 10,000. So he had an army of 12,000. And he marched out of Mecca. He wanted to avoid a battle around Mecca. He marched to the battlefield, as it's in red there, the battle site of Hunayn, where Hawazin, the tribe of Hawazin, had formed an ambush for the Muslim army as they came. They placed archers on the mountains, and they had a big army there in the middle. And as the Muslim army approached, the archers would shoot arrows at the army. And so they had a good plan, but the other thing that he did, what Malik ibn Auf did, was he ordered everybody from the Hawazin to bring along all their property, huge amount of property and animals, and bring their wives and children along with them into battle. And this was meant to motivate the army of Hawazin to fight even harder and to defeat the Muslims. This was a huge mistake. But anyway, as the Muslim army approached the battle site, the Hawazin archers on the mountains started shooting arrows at the Muslim army, and the result was chaos for the first part of the battle. Many Muslims were trying to escape the flow of the arrows as they came in, probably hundreds of arrows coming towards them. Many of them started to flee, run away from the battlefield, but the Prophet was able to stand firm. He inspired the Muslims to stand firm as well and come back and fight Hawazin. And in the end, they had a victory. And as they started to fight back, Hawazin ran away. The whole army just melted out of there, and they ran in different directions. The majority of the Hawazin army fled to the city of city of Ta'if, which was inhabited by Thaqif. Ta'if is down here. So you can see Mecca there, the battle site of Hunayn, and Ta'if down here. So they were another tribe that was related to them, one of the Hawazin tribes. And they entered inside the city of Ta'if, which was very highly protected, well fortified. The Muslim army captured all the army fled and left behind everything, all the property and their wives and children, and they just fled and went to Ta'if. So the Muslims gained a huge amount of war booty, huge amount, and also captives. The Muslim army left the booty behind and marched to Ta'if, laid siege to the city of Ta'if for about, I think, 1 month. And the Prophet was advised to withdraw. They were not able to take the city of Ta'if. They said, we'll come back later. So the Prophet withdrew, went back to the booty at the battle site, and started distributing the huge amount of booty amongst the Muslim army. 4/5 was to the army, and 1/5 was the Prophet himself as the leader of the army. And the Prophet in some ways favored the new converts. He gave them more of the booty than the rest of the army. And some of the old Muslims had been some people from Al-Ansar, Al-Ansar from Medina. Some people were upset. They thought this was not a fair distribution of the booty. And they made this known to the Prophet. And the Prophet made them understand why. And he said that I have something better than this booty. They had a prophet from Allah amongst them. And in the end, they were happy with what the Prophet said, and they accepted it. This was some of the booty that they captured at Hunayn. 24,000 camels, 40,000 goats, 4,000 ounces of silver, and 6,000 prisoners. The Prophet distributed all that amongst the whole army. And even his own 1/5, he gave it away to the new converts. So they had extra. And he did that on purpose to win their hearts and minds. These were newly conquered people. And he wanted to win their favor by giving them more of the booty. Their belief in Islam was many of them was only days old. So their iman was not strong yet. Soon afterwards, just bringing all the booty, the Prophet went back to Mecca, and it was then that he was approached by a delegation from Hawazin who were inside the city of Ta'if. And this delegation said they were ready to surrender and convert to Islam, just like that. And they tried to get the Prophet ask the Prophet to see if he could return some of the booty that they lost in the battle. And the Prophet did his best. He was able to return all the physical property, some of the physical property that had taken. There were still the prisoners. And the Prophet was able to convince the people of his own army to return the women and children to Hawazin. So that was the last lesson. So So up until now, only the army has surrendered to the Prophet, the Hawazin, and Malik ibn Auf, the leader of the army. On top of that, not only did the Prophet agree to return, to allow them to convert to Islam, and he even appointed Malik ibn Auf as the leader of Hawazin again, and he asked Malik ibn Auf and Hawazin to lay siege to Ta'if, the city that they had taken refuge in. So they went back, the Ta'if, and this big army of Hawazin laid siege to Ta'if. And the siege will last many, many months. Now, news reaches the Prophet that the Romans are gathering a new army to fight against the Muslims. So the Prophet this time calls out a jihad, a general mobilization. He asks everybody to contribute. He's going to form a new army. He asks everybody now in Medina, because the Prophet has returned to Medina, asks everybody to contribute. And so majority of the people, they contributed, but this was a difficult time for them, the Muslims, because Medina was going through an economic difficulty at the moment, economic hardship, and they were in the season during the summer season. So, but alhamdulillah, majority of the people answered his call, and then they formed a new army of 30,000 this time. This is the biggest army the Prophet has been able to lead, an army of 30,000. However, as I said, they were going through economic hardship at the time. People were short, didn't have a lot of money, but many people were able to afford to buy equipment and food and whatever else they needed, but not everybody was able to. But some people were able to contribute more than they, because they were wealthy people. So one famous story is that of Sayyidina Uthman ibn Affan. The Prophet called out to the people who will contribute a large number of animals or camels. So Uthman came up and said, I'll contribute 100 camels with all the equipment and food and whatever, provisions for them. The Prophet again, the second time, he calls out, who will contribute to this army? Uthman called out again, I will contribute another 100 camels, fully equipped and provisioned. The third time, this Prophet called out again, and Sayyidina Uthman again came up, stood up and said, I will happy to contribute another 100 camels. Some historians say that in the end, Sayyidina Uthman contributed up to 900 camels, all provisioned. He was very wealthy. And at that point, the Prophet said, Allahumma ardi an Uthman fa innahu anni anhu radin. I am, oh Allah, please be pleased with Uthman, for I am pleased with him. Imagine the Prophet saying that about anybody. And Uthman is very lucky. The Prophet himself was not only was the Prophet pleased with him, but he made a dua to Allah, to be asking Allah to be pleased with him as well. Sayyidina Abu Bakr also contributed. This is again a famous story. Abu Bakr contributed, I think, 4,000 dirhams or ounces of silver, I'm not sure. And the Prophet asked him, have you left anything behind for your family? He said, I've left Allah and His Prophet. Abu Bakr had contributed everything he had, all his wealth, everything to the army. Sayyidina Umar came along and he contributed half of his wealth. He didn't feel he was able to contribute all that he had. Same thing with Sayyidina Abdurrahman ibn Auf, half his wealth as well. But the army reached 30,000, and some people, genuine Muslims, came to the Prophet and said, we can't afford to go with you, we want to. And they were crying. And Allah even mentioned that in the Quran. تاب الله على النبي والمهاجرين والأنصار الذين يتبعوه في ساعة العسرة من بعد. Not that one, sorry. ولا على الذين إذا ما أتوك لتحملهم قلت لا أجد ما أحملكم عليه تولوا وعينهم تفيض من الدمع. Allah even says they were crying, the tears were coming from their eyes, because they were not able to afford to go join the army. Allah is pleased with them. And on top of that, one person, at night, he was doing the tahajjud prayer, and during the tahajjud prayer, he asked Allah, as a form of sadaqah, as a contribution to the army, he asked Allah to give him his hasanat, his good deeds, and distribute it amongst the Muslim army. His good deeds gave him to go to the Muslim army. So the next morning, I think at Fajr prayer, the Prophet called out to the Muslims, the people who prayed behind him. He said, which of you during the night called out to Allah to give him, to distribute his good deeds to the army? And this man said, it was me. So Allah told him that Allah has accepted your dua. Now, there was also another small number of Muslims. Now, these were genuine Muslims, but they didn't give it. They said they didn't give any excuse. They didn't join the army, and they had no valid excuse. So these were people such as Ka'b ibn Malik, I believe. But when the Prophet returned from the whole trip from Tabuk back to Medina, these Muslims were boycotted for 50 days. They were put for them to think about what they did, and they made repentance, and they were forgiven. Of course, some of the hypocrites as well approached the Prophet and they gave their excuses. They gave some of the silliest excuses not to join the army. So one hypocrite, he said to the Prophet that he knows that where they were going, it was, where the Roman Empire was. He said, the women there are so beautiful that I'm afraid that I won't be able to control myself if I go there. So that's why I can't join the army. The Prophet accepted it. He knew this was because he just he said sure, fine, whatever, basically. Now, as I mentioned, this was in the summer season, so the weather was hot, and on top of that, the army had to march nearly 700 kilometers from Medina all the way to the battlefield at Tabuk. So from Medina all the way up there in this hot summer, and not only that, they were going to travel. They didn't have a lot of money. They had some food, not a lot. It was summer, and not only that, they were going to march with the intention of fighting the Roman Empire, not just some small tribe, a powerful empire with a huge army. So this was a test of people's iman and people's patience. But the majority passed the test. So they arrived at the site, a place called Tabuk. It was the general region of what was it called? Well, that was basically up there, so near the Red Sea, within Saudi Arabia today. They arrived there, and they're shocked, surprised to find nobody there. Even though they'd heard that the Romans were had massed a big army, were going to fight them. They arrived there and found nobody there. The Romans probably got scared and they backed up and left. The Muslims traveled all the way up there. Of course, this meant that the Romans lost even more prestige. They had run away from these but for them these were just Arabs, desert Arabs. They lost that prestige, that respect, some more of that respect. The Prophet arrived in Medina, Tabuk. He stayed there for about, I think, 20 days. And on top of that, he sent out a small force to Dawmat al-Jandal, right up there. So a small force of maybe 400, 500, all the way up to Dawmat al-Jandal to capture the leader of one of these tribes that was causing trouble up there. And they brought him back as a prisoner. Yeah. Dawmat al-Jandal, another 422 kilometers from Tabuk. Anyway, so the whole campaign was a success, even though there was hardly any fighting. But Muslims established, consolidated their hold on the northern Arabian Peninsula. The Prophet was able to protect some of these tribes that may have been threatened by the Romans or the allies of the Romans. The Romans withdrew and they lost some of that respect, that prestige they had. And the Prophet, the whole army returns to Medina. On the way, because in the army there were some hypocrites did still join the army. Some gave pathetic excuses and some joined the army and marched all the way up there. But on the way back, some of these hypocrites, they attempted to assassinate the Prophet. But nobody was able to see them. They would cover their faces. Well, they tried to kill the Prophet, but they failed in their attempt and they were able to run away. And they were not captured. The Prophet arrives back in Medina, and after he arrives back, the hypocrites of Medina had built a mosque. The hypocrites themselves were known as Masjid Dirar. They invited the Prophet to go and pray there. Instead, the Prophet ordered the Muslims to go and destroy that mosque, Masjid Dirar. Soon afterwards as well was the death of Abdullah ibn Ubay, the leader of the hypocrites. He died, and the Prophet and Muslims Prophet offered janazah, even prayed in the janazah of Abdullah ibn Ubay. Then Umar was a bit, didn't understand why the Prophet did that, and he said, the Prophet said that he was given a choice whether or not to make forgiveness. He even asked for Allah to forgive Abdullah ibn Ubay. And the Prophet said he was given a choice whether to ask for forgiveness or not, but he knew that he wouldn't be forgiven, Abdullah ibn Ubay. And he quoted that verse, "Astaghfir lahum aw la tastaghfir lahum in tastaghfir lahum 70 maratan fala yaghfir Allah lahum." So whether you ask for forgiveness or not, 70 times, Allah will not forgive him. And afterwards, there's the verse from Surah At-Tawbah was revealed. لا تصلي على أحد منهم مات. Do not, Allah is giving the order afterwards, this new revelation, to not pray over a non-Muslim when that non-Muslim dies. So Ibn Ubay was a hypocrite. He was a non-Muslim in his heart when he died. So Allah is now saying, that's it, do not pray for them. For they have lost faith in Allah and His Messenger and died rebellious. Soon afterwards, so the Muslims have returned from this campaign at Tabuk, some delegations have started to arrive in Medina. The first delegation, they go to meet the Prophet. The first delegation is a delegation from Thaqif, the tribe that's living in Taif. And the Taif have been under siege for a while now by Hawazin. So Thaqif now have realized that the battle is lost, and they offered the Prophet to surrender, even convert to Islam. But they had some sort of conditions, or they want the Prophet to make some concessions for them, to make things easier for them. First thing they asked the Prophet was, they said adultery is very common and they love it. They asked the Prophet if he could give him allowance to continue committing adultery. The Prophet said, this is haram, I cannot permit this. Then they tried the next thing, usury, riba. They said, our economy is based on riba. Please let us continue doing that. The Prophet again said, this is haram, I cannot permit this. And then they said, we love alcohol, we're addicted to it. Can you give us a concession to permit us to drink it? The Prophet said again, this is haram, I cannot permit it. And then they said, how about, can you give us exemption from praying? Because they thought the Muslims prayed 5 times a day was too much for them. Again, the Prophet said, this is a commandment from Allah. I can't go against the commandment of Allah. So they tried several things, and it showed that their conversion wasn't based on faith. It was based on them feeling defeated and unable to resist the Muslims. and it showed a lack of understanding of Islam. In the end, the Prophet says, orders them that they have to destroy Al-Lat, a statue of Al-Lat. And there were a number of important, pre-Islamic Arabia, the greatest gods, the statues that they worshipped. There was Hubal, Manat, and Al-Lat. Al-Lat, which was not in Mecca, it was in Ta'if. Prophet ordered them to destroy Al-Lat. They said, we can't destroy it. Again, it shows you that conversion wasn't based on Iman, on true faith. Can you please send somebody to destroy it? We can't destroy the statue of Al-Lat by ourselves. The Prophet is the one thing the Prophet agreed to. And he agreed to send somebody to go and destroy Al-Lat. So that was one delegation from Ta'if. Another delegation was from a region known as Najran. Anybody know where Najran is located these days? Sorry? No, not Iran, Saudi Arabia. Najran. No. So Najran is on the southern tip of Saudi Arabia, on the border of Yemen. There's even the province there called Najran, it's still there. So he receives the delegation from Najran, and this delegation is all Christians. They've come to meet to discuss the Prophet with the things, discuss coming under Muslim rule. And so they're having a sort of like an interfaith dialogue as well, and the Christians debating with the Prophet. And there's the famous verses from the Quran. Allah tells the Prophet to tell the Christians to bring their people to pray, and the Prophet will bring his people. They will pray to Allah and ask Allah to curse or destroy. I'll have to look it up actually. Yep. سورة آل عمران فمن حاجك فيه من بعد ما جاءك من العلم فقل تعالوا ندعو أبناءنا وأبناءكم ونساءنا ونساءكم وأنفسنا وأنفسكم ثم نبتهل ونجعل لعنة الله على الكاذبين. So the Prophet will bring his family, they'll pray, and the Christians will pray to Allah as well, and نجعل لعنة الله, and ask Allah to curse the liars. As at this stage, the Christians then they backed off. Said they were afraid that the Prophet. They realized the Prophet was telling them wasn't afraid. They weren't confident. They weren't confident. But in the end, like the Prophet didn't ask them to convert to anything. They left them as Christians, and they left. They agreed to be under Muslim rule. So the 9th year of the Hijrah was known as the year of the delegations. I think up to 60 delegations came to meet with the Prophet and to discuss terms of surrender or alliance or even conversion from the rest of the Arabian Peninsula. And that's it for tonight. That's all I had. So if anybody has anything else or any questions or comments? Inshallah, nearly at the 10th year of the Hijrah, and the 10th year is the last year of the Prophet's life. As to salam. Not much left. Okay. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.